I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by
The Two Fingers.
space!
The Age of Stars is probably the most popular ending in Elden Ring. More players have actually unlocked Ranni's ending than the default ending. Since you can marry Ranni in this ending, it's not hard to see why it's so popular among the maidenless Tarnished. Like a lot of other players, Ranni's ending was the first ending I unlocked, and for a while this was the ending that I thought was the best. But when I delved a bit deeper into the lore, there was actually quite a few problems with it that became apparent. That said, because they leave these questions unresolved, they actually open up all kinds of narrative possibilities. After all, the best stories thrive on conflict and struggle. If FromSoft decides to make a sequel and set it after the events of Elden Ring, Ranni's ending should be canon. One aspect of the Age of Stars ending that I haven't seen a lot of people pick up on is that it's the only ending that seems to have an expiration date. As Ranni announces,
Now cometh the age of the stars. A 1000-year voyage under the wisdom of the moon.
but in the lands between, 1,000 years really isn't that long, all things considered. In fact, according to George R. R. Martin, the timeline he was working on spanned 5,000 years, though the exact start and end is a bit ambiguous. That said, this 1000-year voyage is the perfect setup for a sequel. I can easily see Elden Ring 2 taking place right before the Age of Stars ends, with Ranni and the player character fighting to preserve her order. And setting the sequel roughly 1,000 years in the future would give the developers plenty of leeway, both from a gameplay and from a lore standpoint, to add all kinds of new dungeons, ruins, cities, and so on to explore in the lands between. I could also see the sequel taking place after the Age of Stars ends, with the lands between invaded by all kinds of Lovecraftian monstrosities. That's another reason why I think the Ranni ending should be canon. Elden Ring has done such a fantastic job weaving in hard science concepts like gravity, black holes, meteorites, and so on, while still maintaining its high medieval dark fantasy setting. The fights with Radon and Estelle immediately come to mind. I haven't seen a name for this, so I'm just going to come up with the term celestial fantasy. I would love to see more of this in Elden Ring 2. Putting aside the fact that you can marry Ranni, in the Age of Stars ending, you end up with this very Machiavellian manipulator who's essentially a god in control of the lands between. She did orchestrate the Night of the Black Knives and had her own half-brother brutally murdered. She conspired with Rykard, who runs a volcanic torture black site. And she also employed Celavis, who is basically the Jeffrey Epstein of Leonia. And like Epstein, Celavis didn't kill himself. What's interesting is that she doesn't seem to have any sort of regret for what she did or lament that it was a necessary evil, which I think is very telling. It reveals a lot about her character. I don't think Ranni is an evil character per se. Elden Ring is co-written by Miyazaki and Martin. Their characters are supposed to be ethically ambiguous, which I think undermines the claim that Ranni's ending is the best ending. That said, one great thing about having a cunning operator in power is that it could be really fascinating to see what types of schemes Ranni comes up with to preserve her order or to fight against those who would take it from her. To prevent another shattering, Ranni's solution appears to be to hide her order, presumably in outer space. So while her order would be essentially invisible to a lot of the people in the lands between, I don't think her order is as protected as she might think. Ranni was somehow able to kill her own two fingers, which were heavily implied to be in space. That's quite the contrast to the Gold Mask ending, which forms a protective barrier around the Elden Ring itself, and would prevent gods like Marika from voiding the warranty. In addition, it doesn't address the underlying issues in the lands between that Gold Mask identified, the fickleness of the gods, as well as the systematic oppression of groups hated by Marika's Golden Order. Ranni never mentions the Golden Order or the Greater Will. Her primary motivation was to free herself and herself alone from the control of the Two Fingers.
I stole the rune of death, slew mine own Empyrean flesh, casting it away. I would not be controlled by that thing. The Two Fingers and I have been cursing each other ever since.
Which, fair. But it is notable that her motivation is completely self-interested. It wouldn't really rectify some of the systemic injustices that have been meted out against people. I mean, even the Dung Eater at least professes to try to help out the Omen. Thank you so much for watching and listening to me.